The stormy custody battle. Emily Carter brushed a loose strand of hair from her face as she balanced her daughter, Ella, on her hip. The late-night shift at the hospital had drained her, but nothing compared to the ache in her chest, knowing she might soon lose the most precious part of her life. Ella giggled as Emily handed her a brightly colored toy, her innocent laugh momentarily easing the heaviness that had settled in the small apartment. Emily's world was a whirlwind of love and chaos, built around her 2-year-old daughter. After her relationship with Brandon Hayes, a wealthy entrepreneur, fell apart, she'd done everything to provide for Ella. But now Brandon was using his wealth and influence to fight for custody. Today was the hearing that could change everything. The courtroom was filled with an icy tension that made Emily's palms sweat. She sat across from Brandon, who exuded confidence in a tailored navy suit. His lawyer, a tall man with a slick demeanor, shuffled through papers, his smirk making Emily's stomach churn. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Harper entered, her expression stern yet compassionate. Emily whispered a silent prayer, gripping the edge of the table as the proceedings began. Brandon's lawyer wasted no time painting him as the ideal parent. Mr. Hayes provides financial stability, a luxurious home, and access to the best education and health care. Miss Carter, while clearly loving, does not have the means to provide a comparable environment. Emily's lawyer, Lisa, countered passionately, emphasizing the emotional bond between Emily and Ella. A child's well-being isn't solely determined by wealth. Ella thrives in her mother's care, surrounded by love and emotional stability. Judge Harper listened intently, occasionally glancing at Emily, whose eyes brimmed with tears. The highlight of the hearing was a video submitted by Brandon's team, showcasing his sprawling mansion with its pristine nursery, gardens, and a pool. When it was Emily's turn, Lisa presented a series of heartfelt photographs. Emily reading to Ella, baking cookies, and playing in the park. The images portrayed a life filled with warmth, love, and happiness, even if it lacked the luxury of Brandon's world. Emily spoke softly but firmly when called upon. "Your Honor, I may not have Brandon's resources, but I've always provided Ella with everything she needs: love, care, and a sense of security. No amount of money can replace a mother's love." As the proceedings dragged on, Emily caught glimpses of Brandon's expression. He was composed but occasionally glanced toward her with a flicker of something unreadable. Was it guilt? Regret? She couldn't tell. The judge called for a recess, and Emily stepped outside for air. She leaned against a pillar, staring at the gray skies, her heart pounding. Brandon approached her, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Emily, I'm doing this for Ella. I want her to have the best." Emily turned to him, her eyes blazing. "The best. She needs love. Brandon, she needs me." Before Brandon could respond, the bailiff called them back in. The judge resumed her place, the room thick with anticipation. Emily's knees wobbled as Judge Harper began reading the verdict. In the matter of custody for Ella Carter, the court finds in favor of the father, Brandon Hayes, for primary custody. The word hit Emily like a thunderclap. She gripped the table to steady herself, tears streaming down her face. Brandon's lawyer nodded in satisfaction, but Brandon himself looked unsettled. Judge Harper continued, "The court grants Miss Carter supervised visitation, twice monthly, with the possibility of review after 6 months." Ella, seated at the back with a court-appointed guardian, saw her mother crying and called out, "Mama." Her small voice echoed in the courtroom, piercing Emily's heart. She tried to run to her, but the guardian held her back. Emily collapsed into her seat as the courtroom emptied. Brandon lingered for a moment, his hand twitching as if to comfort her, but he turned and walked away. That night, Emily sat in Ella's now empty room, her hand resting on a worn teddy bear. The silence was deafening. Every corner of the room reminded her of her daughter's absence: the tiny shoes by the door, the half-finished coloring books on the table. Across town, Brandon faced a different kind of silence. His mansion, though filled with staff, felt hollow. Ella cried for her mother every night, her wails echoing through the spacious halls. Maria, his longtime housekeeper, approached him one evening. "Mr. Hayes, she's not adjusting well," Maria said gently. "Ella's been asking for her mother. She barely touches her food and refuses to play." Brandon sighed, loosening his tie. "She just needs time. She'll adapt." But Maria's words stayed with him. Over the next few days, Ella's cries grew more heart-wrenching. She clutched a small photo of her and Emily, refusing to let it go. Brandon began to question if he had truly done what was best for his daughter or himself. Meanwhile, Emily channeled her grief into action. She picked up extra shifts, saved every penny, and signed up for parenting and financial planning classes. Her tiny apartment became a war room filled with notes, plans, and legal documents. Lisa visited one evening, reviewing Emily's progress. "You're doing amazing," she said. "But remember, it's not just about money. Stability and structure are key." Emily nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. Ella deserves to come home." The first supervised visit was bittersweet. Ella ran to Emily the moment she saw her, wrapping her arms around her neck. "Mama," she cried, burying her face in Emily's shoulder. Emily held her tightly, savoring the moment. They spent the hour coloring, reading, and playing with Ella's favorite doll. A supervisor observed from a corner, scribbling notes. From an observation room, Brandon watched silently. He couldn't ignore the way Ella lit up in her mother's presence. For the first time, doubt gnawed at him. Had he made the right choice? As the visit ended, Ella cried, clinging to Emily. "Don't go, Mama." Emily kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'll see you soon, baby. I promise." As Brandon carried a sobbing Ella back to the car, he felt a pang of guilt. Emily's words echoed in his mind. "She needs love, Brandon. She needs me." That night, as he watched Ella clutching her photo of Emily, Brandon couldn't shake the growing realization. He might have won the battle, but at what cost? Seeds of doubt. The following days passed like a blur for Emily. She returned to her job at the hospital, throwing herself into double shifts to drown out the emptiness that filled her apartment. But no matter how busy she kept herself, nothing could fill the void left by Ella's absence. Every step into her small apartment reminded her of her daughter. The crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the stuffed bunny abandoned on the couch, the pink toddler shoes by the door, all of it screamed of the little girl who wasn't there. At night, Emily would sit at the edge of Ella's bed, staring at the ceiling, clutching the teddy bear Ella used to carry everywhere. The tears came easily, flowing silently as she replayed every moment in the courtroom. She thought of Brandon's cold, detached expression as the judge ruled in his favor, contrasted by the way his hand had hovered in hesitation afterward. It wasn't like him to second-guess. She clung to that flicker of hesitation like a lifeline. Maybe, just maybe, she still had a chance. But Emily wasn't just sitting and waiting. She had a plan. Her parenting classes were in full swing. Her financial planner was helping her map out a stable future, and she was building her case one careful step at a time. Lisa had advised her to show not just financial and emotional readiness, but also a deep understanding of Ella's developmental needs. Emily dove into books on child psychology and parenting strategies, making detailed notes. She also began documenting her life meticulously, her routines, her home environment, even the meals she prepared. Every detail was aimed at painting a clear picture of the life she could offer Ella. Emily knew that the road ahead would be grueling, but she refused to falter. For her daughter, she would do whatever it took. Across town, Brandon Hayes sat in his opulent home office, the faint cries of Ella echoing through the hallways. His La Jolla mansion, with its sprawling gardens and luxury amenities, felt like a hollow shell. No amount of wealth or comfort seemed to ease the ache of hearing Ella sobbing for her mother every night. Brandon loosened his tie, staring blankly at the family photo on his desk. It was taken during Ella's first birthday party, a rare moment when they had all been together as a family. Emily's face was lit with the joy of a proud mother, holding Ella close as Brandon stood stiffly beside them, distracted by a phone call. He remembered that day vividly, the way Emily had pleaded with him to put his work aside for just one day. He hadn't listened. And now, as he listened to his daughter cry for a mother she couldn't reach, he wondered if he had already started losing long before the courtroom battle. Maria, his housekeeper and Ella's primary caregiver since the custody transfer, knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Hayes, may I speak with you?" Brandon waved her in, his exhaustion visible. "What is it, Maria?" Maria hesitated, her usual confidence faltering. "Ella hasn't eaten properly in days. She refuses to sleep without her stuffed bunny, and she keeps asking for her mother. I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think she's struggling more than you realize." Brandon sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've given her everything. A beautiful room, the best toys, anything she could want." Maria's gaze softened. "She doesn't want things, Mr. Hayes. She wants her mother. Sometimes, what a child needs most can't be bought." Her words hit Brandon harder than he expected. He nodded, dismissing her, but the thought lingered long after she left the room. The next supervised visit at the family center was another bittersweet reunion. Ella ran to Emily the moment she saw her, wrapping her tiny arms tightly around her neck. Emily scooped her up, pressing kisses to her daughter's cheeks as tears threatened to spill. "Mama, I miss you," Ella cried, burying her face in Emily's shoulder. "I miss you too, baby," Emily whispered, holding her tightly. "Mama thinks about you every single day." The visit passed quickly, filled with coloring, storytelling, and laughter. Emily noticed the little things. Ella's cheeks were slightly paler than usual, her tiny hands clinging to the stuffed bunny she refused to let go of. She wasn't the same bubbly child Emily had raised. Something was missing. From the observation room, Brandon watched quietly. He saw how naturally Ella melted into her mother's arms, the way her laughter filled the room when she was with Emily. It was a side of Ella he hadn't seen in weeks. His stomach churned with unease. After the visit, Brandon waited in the hallway, leaning against the wall as Emily exited the playroom. She froze when she saw him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "How is she?" Emily finally asked, her voice guarded. Brandon rubbed the back of his neck, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "She's adjusting." Emily's eyes narrowed. "She's not adjusting, Brandon. She's crying herself to sleep, isn't she?" He hesitated, and that was all the confirmation Emily needed. "She's just a little girl," she continued, her voice breaking. "She needs stability. She needs her mother." "I'm trying," Brandon said defensively. "I'm doing everything I can." "Are you?" Emily shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. "Because all I see is a little girl who's hurting. She doesn't need more toys or a bigger house. She needs love. She needs both her parents." Brandon looked away, guilt flickering across his face. Before he could respond, the court supervisor approached, signaling that their interaction was over. Emily left, her heart heavy but determined. She could see the cracks forming in Brandon's resolve. Now she just needed to push a little harder. That night, Brandon sat in Ella's nursery, flipping through the pages of a photo album Maria had set aside. Each image told a story. Ella's first steps in the park, her messy attempt at finger painting, the way she lit up when Emily read her bedtime stories. The memories were a painful reminder of everything Brandon had missed, too caught up in his work to appreciate the moments that truly mattered. For the first time, Brandon allowed himself to wonder if he had made a mistake. Winning custody had felt like a victory, a way to ensure his daughter had the best possible future. But was it really the best? Or was it just his pride blinding him to what Ella truly needed? Across town, Emily was gearing up for the next stage of her fight. She had scheduled meetings with a child psychologist, prepared a presentation for the court, and even reached out to neighbors and colleagues for character references. She was building an airtight case, and nothing would stop her from bringing Ella home. Little did she know, Brandon was beginning to question everything. The man who had once stood firm in his belief that money and stability outweighed all else was starting to see the cracks in his own logic, and for the first time, he wondered if he was truly doing what was best for his daughter, or what was best for himself. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were about to change everything. A father's awakening. Brandon Hayes sat at his sleek mahogany desk, the light from his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The quiet hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the cavernous mansion, but even that couldn't drown out Ella's cries from her room. It had been weeks since the court had granted him full custody, yet each night followed the same heartbreaking routine. Ella sobbing for her mother until exhaustion claimed her. For the first time in years, Brandon felt powerless. A man accustomed to closing multi-million-dollar deals and commanding boardrooms, couldn't soothe his own daughter. His wealth, his resources, his polished image, none of it could bridge the gap between him and Ella. And deep down, he was starting to realize why. The turning point. The next morning, Brandon canceled his meetings, something unheard of in his professional world. His assistant, Michelle, had nearly fainted at his abrupt change of plans. "I need to be home," he had said simply, leaving her stunned. Brandon spent the day observing Ella. She sat by the window in her pink pajamas, clutching the small photo of her and Emily that Maria had saved from the custody hearing. She had refused breakfast again, barely nibbling on the expensive, organic waffles prepared by the private chef. "Ella," Brandon said softly as he approached her. She turned, her brown eyes glistening with tears, but said nothing. She clutched the photo tighter. "Do you want to play with your new dollhouse?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Ella shook her head, burying her face in the photo. Brandon's heart clenched. He reached out, gently stroking her curly hair. "Do you miss Mama?" Ella nodded, her tiny voice barely a whisper. "Mama reads me stories. Mama sings to me." Brandon swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "What if Daddy reads you a story tonight?" he asked, his voice faltering. Ella looked at him with skepticism. "Mama's better." Her words, spoken with the honesty only a child could muster, stung more than any business failure ever had. But they also sparked something in Brandon, an understanding that had eluded him until now. Ella didn't need a mansion or expensive toys. She needed connection, warmth, and love, things that Brandon had forgotten how to give. Emily's determination. While Brandon grappled with his doubts, Emily was relentless in her pursuit to bring Ella home. Her tiny apartment, though modest, had been transformed into a cozy haven for her daughter. The second bedroom, once a storage space, was now a vibrant toddler's room with hand-painted murals, thrifted furniture, and shelves filled with books and toys. Emily had also taken steps to address the court's concerns. Her parenting classes had taught her techniques to manage stress and create a structured environment for Ella. Her financial advisor had helped her establish a savings account specifically for her daughter's future, and her hospital colleagues had rallied around her, writing glowing letters of support to submit to the court. During her free time, Emily meticulously documented her life, creating a binder filled with photos, schedules, and receipts. It was a tangible representation of the life she was building for Ella, one filled with love, stability, and unwavering commitment. Lisa, her lawyer, was impressed. "You're doing everything right, Emily. But remember, the court values cooperation. If Brandon starts showing signs of compromise, we need to work with that." Emily hesitated. Cooperation sounded like a tall order after the pain Brandon had caused her. But for Ella's sake, she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." A quiet epiphany. One evening, Brandon stood in Ella's room, staring at the untouched toys that filled the shelves. The silence in the house was deafening, punctuated only by Ella's occasional sniffles as she clutched her stuffed bunny. Maria entered the room, holding a small tray with a cup of tea. "Mr. Hayes," she began hesitantly, "may I speak freely?" Brandon nodded, sensing the weight of her words. "I've worked for you for years, and I've seen you achieve incredible things. But, sir, with all due respect, this isn't a business deal. Ella doesn't need more things. She needs to feel loved and secure. And right now, that means being with her mother. Brandon sat heavily in the armchair by the window, running a hand through his hair. I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to give her the best life. Maria softened, stepping closer. The best life isn't always the one with the most toys or the biggest house. It's the one where she feels happiest. Have you thought about what Ella truly wants? Her words struck a chord. For weeks, he had watched Ella struggle, clinging to the one thing she felt connected to, her mother. And now, for the first time, Brandon allowed himself to see beyond his pride. A step toward healing. The next supervised visit at the family center marked a turning point. Brandon arrived early, his presence unexpected. He watched from the observation room as Ella ran to Emily, her laughter filling the air. Emily scooped her up, spinning her around, her own joy evident. Brandon couldn't ignore the stark difference in Ella's demeanor. With Emily, she was vibrant, alive. With him, she was withdrawn, her smiles forced. After the visit, Brandon approached Emily in the hallway, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Can we talk?" Emily stiffened but nodded. They stepped outside, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. "I've been thinking," Brandon began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "about Ella, about what she needs." Emily folded her arms, her skepticism clear. And Brandon sighed, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. "I thought I was doing what was best for her by fighting for custody, but I see now that I might have been wrong." Emily blinked, startled by his admission. "What are you saying, Brandon?" "I'm saying," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "I want to revisit the custody arrangement. Joint custody, maybe. Something that gives Ella more time with you." Emily's breath caught. She had dreamed of this moment, but hearing it from Brandon felt surreal. "You're serious?" Brandon nodded. "I've been watching her, Emily. She's not happy. She cries every night, asking for you. I can't ignore that anymore." Emily's defenses softened, though she remained cautious. Why the sudden change of heart? Brandon met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because I've realized that being a good parent isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right for your child. And Ella needs both of us." For the first time in months, Emily saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, the man who, beneath his ambition and pride, cared deeply for their daughter. She nodded slowly. "All right, Brandon. Let's talk about what's next." That evening, Brandon returned home with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He sat with Ella, reading her bedtime stories for the first time. His voice was shaky, and the words didn't flow as effortlessly as Emily's, but Ella didn't seem to mind. She snuggled against him, clutching her stuffed bunny, and for the first time, Brandon felt like he was finally connecting with his daughter. As Ella drifted off to sleep, Brandon whispered softly, "We'll make this right, Ella. I promise." And for the first time in weeks, the mansion was quiet, not with sadness, but with a tentative sense of hope. Bridging the divide. Brandon Hayes walked into the family attorney's office with a determination he hadn't felt in years. Ella's small face, tear-streaked and pleading, haunted his every waking moment. It wasn't just guilt that had pushed him to reconsider the custody arrangement. It was the undeniable truth that Ella's happiness, her well-being, was tied to her mother. The attorney, David Grayson, sat behind a polished desk, his eyebrows raising in surprise as Brandon laid out his intentions. "You want to amend the custody arrangement?" David asked, leaning forward. "This is unexpected. You fought hard for full custody." Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was wrong, David. I thought I was giving her the best life, but it's clear I'm not. Ella needs her mother." David hesitated before nodding. "Well, we'll need to draft a proposal. Joint custody is complex, especially when it comes to someone in your financial position." "Then make it simple," Brandon interrupted. I don't care about the logistics right now. I just want Ella to spend more time with Emily. David leaned back, studying Brandon. This could have implications for your image, Brandon. Are you prepared for that? Brandon met his gaze, unflinching. Ella's happiness is more important than my image. A tentative olive branch. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her tiny living room, staring at the message on her phone. Brandon had texted her, asking to meet in person. Her immediate reaction was suspicion. Brandon wasn't the type to admit he was wrong. But something about the message felt different. The tone lacked his usual bravado. Her lawyer, Lisa, had advised caution. It could be a ploy, Lisa had warned. But if he's serious about amending the custody arrangement, it's worth hearing him out. Emily agreed to meet Brandon at a neutral location, a small park downtown where Ella used to love playing. The meeting felt surreal. Brandon, the man she had once loved but had come to resent, was now sitting across from her on a weathered bench, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. Thanks for meeting me, Brandon began, his voice softer than she remembered. Emily nodded stiffly. What do you want, Brandon? He sighed, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. I want to fix this, Emily. I want us to work together for Ella's sake. Emily raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. Work together? You mean after you tore her away from me and made me fight tooth and nail just to see her twice a month? Brandon winced at her words, but he didn't argue. I know I've made mistakes. I let my pride and my idea of what was best blind me to what Ella really needs. I see it now. She's miserable without you. Emily crossed her arms, her voice laced with pain. She's not the only one. Brandon looked at her, his expression earnest. I'm sorry, Emily. I thought I was doing the right thing. I see now that I wasn't. That's why I'm here, to make it right. Emily's defenses wavered. She had dreamed of this moment, but hearing Brandon admit his mistakes felt almost too good to be true. What are you suggesting? Joint custody, Brandon said without hesitation. I want Ella to spend equal time with both of us, and not just split weekends or holidays. I want us to share the responsibility of raising her. Emily's heart raced. This was more than she had hoped for, but she wasn't ready to trust him completely. Why the sudden change of heart, Brandon? Why now? Brandon's gaze softened. Because I've been watching her, Emily. I've seen the way she lights up when she's with you, the way she laughs. She doesn't laugh like that with me. I can't ignore it anymore. Emily studied him carefully, searching for any hint of manipulation. But all she saw was a man trying to be honest, trying to do what was right for their daughter. All right, she said finally. I'm willing to discuss it. But I need to know this isn't just a temporary decision. Ella needs stability. Brandon nodded. I understand. Let's take it slow, but let's start somewhere. A new beginning. The first step toward their new arrangement was a shared afternoon with Ella at the park. Emily had been hesitant, unsure if it was too soon, but Brandon had insisted it was important for Ella to see her parents working together. Ella's face lit up when she saw her mother and father together, holding hands as they walked toward her. Mama, Daddy, she squealed, running toward them. Emily scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her cheek. Hi, baby. Did you miss Mama? Ella nodded enthusiastically. Mama, can we go on the swings? Brandon, standing beside them, smiled. I'll push you, sweetheart. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and warmth. For the first time in months, Ella was truly happy. Brandon and Emily took turns pushing her on the swings, helping her climb the jungle gym, and cheering her on as she slid down the slides. It was a simple day, but it was one Ella would remember for a long time. As the sun began to set, Emily and Brandon sat on a bench, watching Ella chase a butterfly. The silence between them was no longer hostile but contemplative. She's so much happier today, Brandon said quietly. Emily nodded. She needed this. She needed us to work together. Brandon glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Do you think Do you think we can keep this up? For her. Emily turned to him, her eyes softening. If it's for Ella, I'll do whatever it takes. Rebuilding trust. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Emily and Brandon worked closely with their lawyers to draft a new custody arrangement. It wasn't easy. There were disagreements over schedules, schooling, and holidays. But for Ella's sake, they both made compromises. Brandon surprised Emily by suggesting they find a home closer to each other to make the transitions easier for Ella. I know you don't want to depend on me financially, he said, but this is about stability for her. Let me help. Emily hesitated but ultimately agreed, knowing it was the best option for Ella. With Brandon's help, she found a modest house just a few blocks away from his mansion. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect for her and Ella. A fresh start in a safe neighborhood. As they worked together, Emily saw a side of Brandon she hadn't seen in years. He was still ambitious and driven, but there was a humility to him now that hadn't been there before. And while the wounds of their past hadn't completely healed, there was a sense of hope that hadn't existed before. A new normal. The first night in her new home, Emily tucked Ella into bed, reading her 3 bedtime stories, as they had always done. Ella snuggled against her, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms. I love you, Mama, Ella whispered sleepily. Emily kissed her forehead, tears brimming in her eyes. I love you too, baby, always. Across town, Brandon sat in his quiet mansion, staring at a photo of Ella and Emily. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and they still had a long way to go, but he knew they were on the right path. Together, they were rebuilding not just a custody arrangement, but a family, one step at a time. Building bridges. The transition to joint custody was anything but smooth. While the legal documents had been signed and the schedules meticulously planned, the emotional journey for everyone involved was still fraught with challenges. Yet, for the first time, Emily and Brandon found themselves united in a shared purpose, giving Ella the love and stability she deserved. Ella's first weekend with Emily. The first weekend Ella spent at Emily's new home was a mixture of joy and adjustment. When Brandon dropped her off, Ella clung to him tightly, her tiny arms wrapped around his neck. Don't go, Daddy, she pleaded, her voice quivering. Brandon crouched down, meeting Ella's tear-filled eyes. I'm not going far, sweetheart. You're going to have so much fun with Mama, and I'll see you in just a couple of days. Ella nodded hesitantly, her grip loosening as Emily stepped forward and knelt beside them. Hey, baby, she said softly, brushing Ella's curls from her face. We've got a big day planned. Remember the park with the ducks? And I made your favorite, mac and cheese with broccoli. Ella's eyes lit up at the mention of her favorite meal, and she finally let Brandon go. Brandon rose, meeting Emily's gaze. Call me if she needs anything, he said, his tone softer than she expected. Emily nodded. I will. As Brandon drove away, Emily turned her attention to Ella, whose mood had already shifted. They spent the morning at the park, feeding ducks and playing on the swings. Back at home, they cooked together, Ella standing on a stool as she stirred the cheese sauce. By bedtime, Ella was laughing and snuggling in Emily's arms, her initial hesitation forgotten. That night, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed with gratitude. For the first time in months, she felt whole again. Ella was home. Brandon's quiet house. While Ella thrived with Emily, Brandon struggled with the emptiness of his house. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual sound of Ella's giggles or her tiny feet padding across the marble floors. He spent the evening in his home office, flipping through photo albums of Ella as a baby. Maria brought him a cup of tea, her gentle presence a comfort. It's quiet tonight, she said softly. Brandon nodded, his gaze fixed on a photo of Ella and Emily at the beach. Too quiet, he admitted. Maria hesitated before speaking. You're doing the right thing, Mr. Hayes. Ella needs both of you. Brandon sighed. I know. It's just hard. I'd spent so long thinking success meant having control over everything. But I've realized parenting isn't about control. It's about letting go. Maria smiled. That's a lesson many never learn. You're growing, Mr. Hayes. And Ella will see that. Navigating the new dynamic. Over the next few weeks, Emily and Brandon worked hard to navigate their new dynamic as co-parents. They communicated frequently, coordinating Ella's routines, school activities, and medical appointments. It was awkward at first, their conversations stilted and formal. But gradually, the ice began to thaw. One evening, Emily called Brandon to discuss Ella's preschool application. She's thriving in her current daycare, Emily said, but I think a smaller preschool would be better for her. Something with more one-on-one attention. Brandon listened carefully, his tone thoughtful. I agree. I've been looking into a few options near both of our homes. Maybe we can visit them together. Emily was surprised but agreed. That sounds like a good idea. Their visits to the preschools marked a turning point. Seeing Ella's excitement as they toured classrooms reminded them both of their shared goal, giving her the best possible start in life. By the time they made a decision, they found themselves talking not just about logistics, but about Ella's personality and dreams. She's so curious, Emily said, her eyes lighting up. She loves asking questions about how things work. Brandon chuckled. She gets that from you. I remember when you used to ask a million questions about my business. Emily smiled, a hint of nostalgia creeping into her voice. Back when you actually had time to answer them. The moment was fleeting but significant. It was the first time they had spoken about their past without anger or resentment. Ella's growing confidence. Ella began to blossom under the new arrangement. With equal time spent with both parents, she grew more confident and secure. She loved her weekends with Emily, filled with bedtime stories, baking, and trips to the park. At Brandon's house, she enjoyed exploring the vast gardens and playing games with Maria. One evening, as Brandon tucked Ella into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, Mama said I'm brave." Brandon smiled, smoothing her hair. "She's right. You're the bravest girl I know." Ella giggled. "Do you think Mama can come to the park with us next time?" Brandon hesitated but then nodded. "I think we can make that happen." A joint effort. The next weekend, Brandon and Emily took Ella to the zoo together. It was the first time they had spent time as a family since the custody battle, and it was filled with both awkwardness and moments of genuine connection. Ella held both their hands as they walked through the exhibits, her joy evident. At one point, as Ella excitedly watched the elephants, Brandon turned to Emily. "Thank you for agreeing to this. It means a lot to her." Emily nodded, her expression soft. "It means a lot to me too. Seeing her happy. It's all I've ever wanted." The day ended with a quiet understanding between them. They weren't just co-parents. They were partners in raising a little girl who adored them both. Healing old wounds. As weeks turned into months, the lines between their lives began to blur. Emily and Brandon found themselves relying on each other more, not just for logistical reasons, but as emotional supports. When Ella fell ill with a fever one night, Brandon called Emily for advice, her calm guidance easing his fears. Similarly, when Emily struggled with a difficult week at work, Brandon offered to take Ella for an extra day to give her a break. Slowly, they began to rebuild a foundation of trust. It wasn't the same as it had been during their marriage. Too much had changed. But it was a foundation nonetheless, one built on mutual respect and a shared love for Ella. A new kind of family. By the time Ella's birthday approached, Emily and Brandon had settled into a rhythm. They planned her party together, choosing a theme, ordering a cake, and sending out invitations. The party, held in Emily's backyard, was a joyful celebration of not just Ella's growth but their own. As Ella blew out the candles on her cake, surrounded by her friends and family, Emily and Brandon stood side by side, their smiles genuine. For the first time in years, there was no tension between them, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were doing right by their daughter. That night, as Emily tucked Ella into bed, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought them here, to a place where they could truly be a family, even if it looked different than she had once imagined. And for Ella, it was more than enough. A new chapter. Months had passed since Brandon and Emily had embarked on their journey as co-parents. What had begun as a fragile truce had blossomed into a harmonious partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering love for Ella. The arrangement, though unconventional, had brought balance and happiness to all their lives. Ella's growth. Ella had flourished under the new joint custody arrangement. Her laughter now echoed freely in both homes, her joy contagious. She confidently split her time between her two worlds, each filled with love and care. At Emily's house, she cherished bedtime stories and baking cookies. At Brandon's, she reveled in exploring the lush gardens and playing with her dog, Max. Her teachers noticed a change, too. Ella's confidence has grown tremendously. Her preschool teacher, Miss Harper, told Emily and Brandon during a parent-teacher conference. She's curious, kind, and eager to participate in every activity. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. The praise warmed Emily's heart. It's because she feels secure now, she said, glancing at Brandon, who nodded in agreement. Brandon's reflection. One quiet evening, after dropping Ella off at Emily's house, Brandon returned to his mansion. The house still felt too large, but it no longer felt as hollow as it once had. He had begun spending more time at home, prioritizing Ella over work. His office, once filled with stacks of contracts and business proposals, now held Ella's drawings taped to the walls and a small shelf of books they read together. Sitting in his study, Brandon opened a leather-bound journal he'd begun keeping after the custody battle. Writing wasn't something he had ever done before, but it helped him process the overwhelming changes in his life. Entry number 47. Tonight, as I drove Ella to Emily's, she hummed a song Emily taught her. It struck me how different she is now. Happier, lighter, more confident. I realize now that winning full custody wasn't a victory at all. It was selfishness, driven by my need to control. Letting go of that control has given her the chance to thrive. It's also given me something I never expected, a sense of peace. I still have a long way to go, but I'm trying. For Ella. Emily's progress. Emily's life had also transformed. With Ella back in her arms for half the week, her apartment felt alive again. Her new home, modest yet cozy, had become a sanctuary where Ella thrived. The walls were adorned with photos of their adventures, trips to the zoo, beach days, and lazy mornings baking pancakes. At work, Emily's colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor. "You're glowing," her friend and fellow nurse, Carla, teased one evening during a break. "It's like you've got your spark back." Emily smiled, sipping her coffee. "I have. It hasn't been easy, but knowing Ella is happy and secure makes everything worth it." Emily's relationship with Brandon had also shifted. What had once been fraught with tension was now collaborative and even, at times, friendly. They had learned to navigate disagreements with understanding rather than anger. It was a far cry from where they had started. Ella's graduation. Ella's preschool graduation was a pivotal moment for all three of them. Held in a small auditorium filled with proud parents, the event was a celebration of the children's growth and accomplishments. Emily arrived early, helping Ella adjust the tiny cap on her head. "You look so grown up, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ella grinned. "Do you think Daddy will like it?" "I'm sure he will," Emily said, brushing a curl from Ella's forehead. When Brandon arrived, his face lit up at the sight of Ella. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, crouching to hug her. He glanced at Emily, a rare smile crossing his face. "You did a great job with her outfit." Emily smiled back. She picked it out herself. During the ceremony, as Ella walked across the stage to receive her certificate, Emily and Brandon clapped louder than anyone in the room. In that moment, they weren't two separate entities. They were Ella's parents, united in their pride and love for her, a shared realization. Later that evening, Brandon lingered at Emily's house after dropping Ella off. She had fallen asleep quickly, tired from the excitement of the day. Brandon sat on the couch while Emily brewed tea in the kitchen. "I've been thinking," Brandon said as Emily handed him a steaming cup, "about how far we've come, about how different things are now." Emily sat across from him, her hands cradling her own mug. "It's been a long road," she admitted, "but it's worth it. Ella's happy, and that's all that matters." Brandon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for being patient with me, for always putting Ella first, even when I didn't." Emily's eyes softened. "We've both grown, Brandon, and we're both doing our best. That's all we can do." For the first time in years, there was no tension, no lingering resentment between them. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had been through the fire and come out stronger. Looking forward, as the months turned into years, Brandon and Emily continued to navigate the complexities of co-parenting. There were challenges, of course, disagreements over schedules, differences in parenting styles, but they always came back to what mattered most: Ella's well-being. Ella grew into a bright, confident child who excelled in school and cherished the love of both her parents. She often spoke proudly to her friends about her two homes, each filled with warmth and care. Emily and Brandon, though no longer a couple, had forged a partnership stronger than either of them had imagined. They celebrated holidays together, attended Ella's school events as a team, and even shared the occasional family dinner. One evening, as they watched Ella perform in a school play, Brandon leaned over and whispered to Emily, "We did good." Emily smiled, her heart full. Yes, we did. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was a life filled with love, growth, and the unwavering bond of family. And for Ella, it was perfect. The glow of Ella's preschool graduation lingered like a warm light in Emily and Brandon's lives, marking a significant milestone, not just for Ella, but for the entire family. Though their paths had diverged long ago, the experience had brought them closer, creating a new kind of partnership, one built on mutual respect, compromise, and love for their daughter. Navigating this shared future. The weeks following Ella's graduation brought a sense of normalcy to their shared parenting routine. Yet the emotional weight of co-parenting remained a challenge. They had learned to communicate effectively, to discuss Ella's needs without falling into old patterns of blame or resentment. Still, deeper wounds lingered, unspoken but felt. One evening, during a rare joint dinner at Emily's house, Brandon brought up a topic they had both avoided. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant, "do you ever think about how we ended up here?" Emily glanced up from the salad she was tossing. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "I mean, how we let things fall apart. I think about it sometimes, and I wonder if I could have done things differently." Emily paused, her hand gripping the edge of the bowl. The air felt heavier, the space between them charged with unspoken regrets. "I think about it too," she admitted. "But what's the point? We can't change the past." Brandon nodded slowly. "No, we can't. But I think we've done something right now, something good for Ella. And maybe even for ourselves." Emily studied him for a moment. He seemed different, softer. The Brandon she had known years ago had been ambitious to a fault, driven by success and status. This Brandon, sitting in her modest kitchen, seemed humbled by the journey they'd taken. "Maybe we have," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "A milestone together." Months later, as the summer sun warmed the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Brandon and Emily decided to throw a joint birthday party for Ella. It was a big step, one that required careful planning and mutual trust. They chose the community park as the venue, a neutral space where both sides of their family and friends could gather. The day of the party was a blur of activity. Emily arrived early to decorate, stringing up balloons and setting out the homemade cupcakes she baked the night before. Brandon showed up shortly after, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a more relaxed energy as he carried boxes of party favors. When Ella arrived, her face lit up with pure joy. "Mama, Daddy," she squealed, running between them, her excitement infectious. The party was a resounding success. Ella beamed as her parents stood side by side, helping her cut the cake. For the first time in years, Emily and Brandon felt like a family again, not in the traditional sense, but in a way that mattered most to Ella. As the sun began to set, Brandon and Emily sat on a picnic bench, watching Ella play with her friends. The silence between them was easy, filled with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. "She's so happy," Brandon said, his voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I'd see her this happy again." Emily nodded, her eyes soft. "She's happy because she has both of us." Closing old wounds. Later that week, Brandon invited Emily to his house for coffee, an invitation she accepted with cautious curiosity. She hadn't been inside his mansion since their separation, and stepping through the grand doors brought a flood of memories. They sat in his sunlit kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Brandon handed her a mug, his expression unusually introspective. "I wanted to show you something," he said, standing and walking toward the living room. Emily followed, curious. On the wall hung a collection of framed photos, some old, some new. One caught Emily's eye immediately, a picture of her holding Ella as a newborn, her face lit with the pure joy of a mother's love. Another showed Ella with Brandon, giggling as he carried her on his shoulders. The most recent photo was from Ella's birthday party, capturing the three of them together, their smiles genuine. "You kept these," Emily said, her voice tinged with surprise. Brandon nodded. "I didn't at first. For a while, I tried to distance myself from everything. But then I realized something. These moments are part of who we are. They're part of Ella's story. And no matter what happened between us, they matter." Emily's throat tightened as she looked at him. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. Brandon hesitated before speaking again. "Emily, I know I can't undo the past, but I want you to know how grateful I am. For everything. For Ella, for the way you've handled all of this, for not giving up on her, or on me." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back. "We both made mistakes, Brandon. But I think we finally found our way. The new normal." As the years went by, their co-parenting arrangement became second nature. They celebrated milestones together, from Ella's first day of elementary school to her dance recitals and soccer games. The trust they had rebuilt became the foundation of their new relationship, a relationship not as husband and wife, but as partners in parenthood. Ella thrived, her confidence growing with each passing year. She often told her friends about her two homes, speaking proudly of the love and support she received from both her parents. One evening, as Emily tucked Ella into bed, her daughter looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, are you and Daddy happy now?" Emily smiled, brushing a curl from Ella's face. "Yes, baby. We're happy because we both love you so much." As Emily left the room, she found Brandon standing in the hallway, waiting to say goodnight to Ella. Their eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had come a long way, together. It wasn't the life they had imagined, but it was one filled with love, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done right by their daughter. And for Emily, Brandon, and Ella, it was a new beginning worth cherishing.